Welcome back to Kid Detectives. We are almost done with our Missing Manatee book. So today we will be reading chapter 17, and tomorrow will be the last chapter. So be excited. Just a reminder before we get started, please have your detective notebook or a piece of paper out. That way you can jot down some ideas, maybe some questions that you might have, okay? Some things that need to be solved. We're going to be doing this for the rest of the year. It's nice and handy to maybe even mark it off as your Missing Manatee section, okay? So grab that notebook so you're ready to write down some clues. I want to remind you of the elements of mystery. We've been going over the detective, the suspect, and the evidence, of course. We talked a little bit about Blink being a witness or something. And now, this chapter, it's all coming, undone. We're going to find out the mystery, okay? So, before we ended our last lesson, we talked about somebody approaching the boat, okay? It could be the deputy, could be Dirty Dan, possibly. We're going to be focusing on our final clues and then solving the mystery. And maybe we can kind of review back in our heads, oh, that evidence made sense. Okay, that made sense. And it's all linking together. Our learning target for today is, I can determine the central message or lesson and explain how it is conveyed through key details in the text. So that means our focus, we're going to be determining what the central message is today. Since we're going to find out who the suspect is and uncover all the mystery, this is very important because we want to know what we kind of learned from the text. So what is our central message? Ways to figure out the central message, and don't worry, I will give you hints to help you out on the next slide. But let's talk about what exactly the central message is. The central message is the big idea, okay, so the overall idea of the story, what basically is conveyed in the story, what it's mostly about, so the different themes that come up and what comes around it, so what it's mostly expressing. Or it could be partially to what the character learned. So think about what our main character has been dealing with and what he finally is learning, uncovering the information that we're going to learn in this chapter. What do you think the central message is in our book, The Missing Manatee? So you are welcome to come up with your own central message, but here are some examples to kind of help you out. The first example is, honesty is the best policy. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Kindness gets better results than anger. Things are not always as they appear. Never give up until you find the truth. Always test your ideas before sharing them. Asking for help is nothing to be ashamed of. Never judge a book by its cover. Working with others is better than keeping secrets. And the last one is, if a plan doesn't succeed, keep trying. So most of these are pretty acceptable as far as the central message. What you need to do is pick the one that really jumps out at you so that you can explain your answer the best. So you're going to talk about the characters and talk about how they express this central message and it makes this one the best central message, because all of these can probably have a little bit about, each little bit, one of them kind of makes sense in the story. But there might be one that pops out to you that goes, ooh, that's the central message. That makes sense to me. So as we're reading today, if I were you, I'd pause the video right now, kind of pause it, read over these again by yourself, and try to figure out which one is the best central message. If you're still not sure, I will show you this list at the end of the video, and then you can make a better choice maybe. But you should have an idea of which one makes sense to you pretty much now. But if you're struggling, don't worry about it. Pick the best one, and then you're going to explain within a sentence or two, maybe with the characters or an example of why that central message makes sense in the story. Before we start reading chapter 17, we're going to review chapter 16 with a recap. So at the beginning of the chapter, Skeet lies to Meemaw and tells her that he's going to go to his friend Lenny's house, when really he's going to go and check out the Manatee to make sure it's still there. When he gets to the marina, he notices that Dirty Dan's boat is still in the slip. Okay, so it makes him feel a little bit better, but then he runs into Blink, and Blink is acting really weird. He's not his usual fun-loving self. He's kind of offish and like, can't talk to Skeet, like gotta stay quiet. And it makes Skeet wonder, like, why won't Dirty Dan let him talk? Like, why does he want him to keep quiet? So it's very suspicious. Skeet gets off and goes into his boat, and when he makes it to the Manatee kind of looks even more decomposed, and it's basically a carcass by now. Okay, so he's staring at this carcass, and as he's observing this carcass, a boat is approaching, and that's where we left off of. And there's a couple of choices of what could be coming, like maybe the deputy, maybe some other bystander or different culprit, or possibly Dirty Dan. So that is what we're jumping into for chapter 17 today. So enjoy, because you are going to basically discover our mystery, and it's pretty interesting to kind of uncover the truth about everything. We have 3 vocabulary words to go over for this chapter. The first word is wry. Okay, when you talk about wry, we're talking about a wry face, so the expression that is made. And wry means a grimace, a pout face, disappointed, saddened look, or even solemn. Okay, so in the book, the character looks over at the manatee and he gives a wry face. So very sad, like, I wish this didn't happen. The next vocabulary word is boonies. Okay, and I'm sure you've heard boonies all the time, but didn't really know what it meant. When you're in the boonies, you're far away, you're in a rural place, it's a boring place, it's the middle of nowhere. Okay, so that's what the boonies are. So the out nowhere is basically where they are with the manatee, so they're out in the boonies. And the last one is muddling, which is in the last back of our chapter. It's the last page just before we finish our questions. I'm just going to read this a little bit so you have an understanding of what they mean by muddling, okay? I was always making everybody into a hero or bad guy, but most people, even parents, were muddling around somewhere in the middle. So kind of like that idea of nobody's perfect. You know, we're all kind of making mistakes here and there and figuring out what's right. Just hopefully trying to do the right thing and following the rules. But muddling means to make a mess or confused. So you're making somebody confused or making a mess. And it's a state of mental confusion. So you're muddling around. Okay, and those are our vocabulary words for the day.
Chapter 17. Dirty Dan motored slowly across the open stretch of water toward where I sat in my skiff, frozen with panic and a weird sense that this couldn't really be happening. It seemed to take hours for him to reach me, hours during which my mind scrambled frantically for a way out and came up with nothing. Dan cut the engine at the right moment to allow his boat to glide alongside mine. The silence was complete. There wasn't the squawk of a bird, the buzz of an insect, or the splash of a fish in the shallow water. It was as if Dan and I were alone at the end of the world. Finally, he spoke. "Hello, Skeet." I didn't answer. My throat felt so dry, I wasn't sure I could. "We need to have a talk." I still couldn't answer. After a moment, he gestured toward the manatee. "You couldn't let it go, could you? Had to keep after it." Then he nodded, saying, "I understand that. You're stubborn. It's the same stubbornness that made you keep trying until you caught that tarpon. I got it too." He smiled at me, his scars stretching in his brown, leathery face, and he seemed so much like the old Dan I almost smiled back. I caught myself and looked away. "But now we got ourselves a situation, Skeet, and one of us is going to have to give in. I came out here to see who it was going to be, you or me." At last I found my voice, though it came out kind of small and croaky. What if I won't give in? Are you going to kill me too? Dan shook his head, and even though I knew better, I thought he looked genuinely sad. I guess I can't blame you for thinking like that, Skeet, but it pains me all the same. He sighed. I saw you talking to Blink this morning. He came home all nervous and upset again, and I knew I had to do something to stop all this. I didn't come to hurt you. I came so nobody and nothing else gets hurt. He pointed to the manatee and made a wry face. It's too late for him. Yeah, I said, thanks to you. Now you want me to keep quiet about it, just so you don't have to answer for what you did? In a way, yes. I couldn't believe it. He sure had nerve. I had to give him credit for that. Dan went on. Because, in a way, it really was my fault. Oh, really? I thought, almost letting loose a wild laugh. Next, you're going to tell me that, in another way, it was the manatee's fault for getting in the path of the bullet you shot at him. I never should have let Blink shoot the gun, Dan said. What? Blink and a gun? But we were pretty far out in the boonies that morning, and there was nobody else around, and I thought, what harm could it do? He'd been after me for a long time to shoot the gun, saying he just wanted to try it. Probably because of things he sees on TV. Dan's voice trailed off for a second. Anyway, there were a few of Blinky's old tennis balls rolling around the bottom of the boat, so I told Blink I'd throw them out and he could shoot at them. I showed him the right way to hold the gun and how to work the safety, and told him never to point it at anyone. Told him he could shoot at 3 balls in the water. Just that one time, I said. Dan looked away, then back at me and said, there are so many things he can't do, you know. I thought I could let him do this, let him feel like a regular kid for once. It seemed harmless enough at the time. Dan was quiet for a minute, and I thought I could see how letting Blink shoot at some tennis balls might have sounded like an okay idea. Then Dan said, so he was real careful, and he shot at one, then another, missing, you know, but laughing and getting a big kick out of the noise and the splash and all. And then just as I threw the 3rd ball, this manatee's head popped up out of the water, and before I knew it, he'd shot it. Dan paused and shrugged. I didn't say a word. I was so caught up in the story, picturing it in my mind, the dopey manatee's head coming up and Blink, taken by surprise, pulling the trigger before he even knew what he was doing, hitting the manatee in the head. Echoing my thoughts, Dan said, I'm sure he didn't know what he was doing. At first he was excited because the manatee drifted over near the boat and he could touch it. He didn't understand why it wasn't moving. When I told him it was dead, he got all worked up. You know how he does, crying and all. I still don't know if he understands that he shot it. No, I thought, you can't ever be sure, not with Blink. And I didn't try to make him understand. It would only make him feel worse. Dan smiled weakly and said, I guess there is one good thing that came out of all this. He doesn't want to play with the gun anymore. I think I might have smiled back. Anyway, I was telling myself that it was an unfortunate accident, but it was an accident, and I couldn't see any good coming from Blink being hauled in and questioned or whatever might happen to him. I knew Earl would be good to him, but what if it wasn't Earl I was dealing with? Then I thought about saying I shot it, but if I was hauled in, then where would Blink be? I'm all he's got. Yeah, I said, I know. Well, there's something you probably don't know, Skeet, and it made a difference in all this. He took off his hat, brushed his hand through his sweaty hair, and put the cap back on. I've got a little problem with Mr. Jack Daniels. At first I didn't know who he was talking about. Then I remembered Jack Daniels' whiskey was his butterfly milk. Oh, I said. There was a time when I used to get blind, crazy drunk, get in fights, cause all kinds of trouble. I drove my wives away and got myself a record with the police. Then one night I got in a car accident when I was drunk as a skunk. Blink was in the car with me and he got banged up pretty good. Dan paused and looked down at his hands. They almost took him away from me after that. Ever since then I try to drink just enough to keep it together, keep my hands from shaking, you know. I didn't know, and I swallowed, not sure what to say. I thought about Dan sipping on the bottle all day in the boat, but not seeming drunk. I guess that was what he meant, but I'd have to ask Mac or Meemaw about it. So anyway, when I heard a boat coming that morning, all that stuff ran through my head. I guess I panicked, thinking Blink would get in trouble for shooting the manatee, or else I'd be in trouble for letting him. Maybe they'd take him away from me for real this time. Maybe there'd be a hefty fine, and I don't have the money for that. If I couldn't pay, maybe I'd go to jail. My past record wouldn't help. Maybe, well, like I said, I panicked. When I heard a boat coming, I pulled my boat up a side channel and hid real quick. I never imagined it would be you or that you'd find the body, but you did, and, well, here we are. I thought of Blink talking about how quiet he'd been in the boat. Now I knew he was talking about staying quiet while he and Dan hid from me. Piecing the rest together, I said, and then you went back and moved the body after I left to get Earl. Dan nodded. I didn't know for sure where you were going or if you'd be coming back, but the way you were examining the head, I knew you'd figure out it was shot. But Earl and I never saw you, I said. Then I realized, oh, you must have taken one of the smaller channels on the way back to the marina. That's why we didn't run into you on the river. He nodded again. And then neither of us said anything for a pretty long time. I was thinking about what Meemaw had said that morning about life getting complicated, and it seemed, as usual, that she was right. I was thinking about life giving you the down and dirty and never letting you go backwards, and how that didn't just mean me and Mac and Mom, but Dirty Dan and Blink too. I was thinking, too, about parents loving their kids more than anything, and how that might make them do all sorts of things, like Dan hiding the manatee to protect Blink, or like Mom wanting real bad for me to have a life she thought would be better than hers, or like Mac moving to a trailer down the street so I didn't have to hear any more fighting. I was thinking that even though some people might say what Dirty Dan did was wrong, maybe there was another way to look at it. I figured he was simply being the best father to Blink he knew how to be. He wasn't perfect, but so what? I was beginning to realize that nobody was. I was always making everybody into heroes or bad guys, but most people, even parents, were muddling around somewhere in the middle. Okay, I said to Dan, I give. He looked back at me, his scars stretching with his puzzled frown. I give, I repeated. You said one of us had to. He buried his face in his hands for a second, breathing a big sigh of relief, and only then did I realize how worried he'd been. He said, I was hoping if I explained, you'd understand. I do. He nodded, staring off into the distance for a moment. Then his glance indicating the manatee, he asked, should we try to bury that thing? I looked up at the sky and pointed to the vultures who were circling again, waiting. Let's leave it, I said. Vultures have to eat too, I guess.
This concludes chapter 17, and this chapter was really interesting because we finally uncovered the mystery. Okay, so now we know exactly what happened to the manatee. So I have a couple questions for you to answer. One, who actually committed the crime? This is basically a super easy answer unless you weren't paying attention. So write down the person's name who committed the crime, the actual culprit. Then the next question is, did you ever suspect this person, okay, so the person you just told me about, did you ever suspect that this person would have committed this crime? Why or why not? So did you suspect them, and why did you suspect them? Or you had no clue, and why didn't you suspect them? Why did you think that they were innocent? The next question is what we've been working on for our learning target, okay? And is, what is the central message of the missing manatee? There are multiple answers for this question, and I am going to show you another slide at the end of this, so right after this questionnaire, that's going to give you those examples again in case you didn't jot yours down. So pick your central message, and all you got to do is pick that one sentence from the next slide. Then the next question, you're going to explain your answer. It says, why do you think your above answer is the central message? Okay, so just use some examples from the book and within a sentence or two, tell me why you think your central message is the correct central message. So before you start answering your questions today, I just wanted to help you out with number 3 and number 4. So first, you're going to look for the central message. Reminder, the central message is the big idea, what the story is mostly about, or what you learned, okay, or the character learned. So it's not always the easiest thing to figure out, because sometimes there's more than one central message, or there's stuff that's kind of hidden, or it doesn't quite make sense. So I am going to give you that list of examples again. You are welcome to choose your own idea for the central message. That's up to you, but here are those examples. First one is, honesty is the best policy. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Kindness gets better results than anger. Things are not always as they appear. Never give up until you find the truth. Always test your ideas before sharing them. Asking for help is nothing to be ashamed of. Never judge a book by its cover. Working with others is better than keeping secrets. And the last one is, if a plan doesn't succeed, keep trying. So what you need to do for number 3 is pick the best central message out of this example, or think of your own. Then you're going to explain why you think it's the central message. So number 4 is your explanation. You're going to choose a character, choose an action that went on, and think about why that helps define the central message. Like, why is that the point? After you're done with that, we're pretty much set, and tomorrow is our last day reading this chapter book. So I know we're excited because it's been a long chapter book. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been fun, but definitely it's nice to finish a good book.